Have you had an infertility journey? Did this impact your vision of family and mothering? Good morning, this is Dr. Amy Novat, your host of Gyno Curious. We are here to investigate what it means to be a healer and to be healed. Please, if you like what you hear today, follow and share and give 5 stars on whatever podcast app you're using. Feel free to send comments to gynocurious.com or to comments at radiofreerhiniecliff.org. So please let us know your thoughts. So I've had the pleasure of speaking with Theresa Widman about a number of different topics as a guest on her wonderful podcast, I Want What She Has, that airs weekly on Radio Kingston. But today we're going to have a more personal conversation about her experience with infertility and the birth of her son. Theresa is a sound facilitator and holistic coach who loves creating space for others to heal, dream, and thrive. She's the former festival director and board president for the O Positive Festival, and now she oversees the festival's public-facing wellness offerings. When she's not working or being a mom, she serves the community as the chair of Live Well Kingston's Heal Well focus team and as a member of the Ulster County Restorative Justice Task Force and Conviction Integrity Unit. She's also a practitioner with the holistic health community. Welcome, Theresa. I'm so grateful to have you here this morning.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here, Amy.
So over hill and dale, ice and storm, Theresa has joined us this morning here at the Epicurean in Rhiniecliff, New York, a wonderful place that you should all come and visit and know about. So Theresa, is this the first time you've ever been to the Epicurean?
It is.
Yeah.
I am actually very happy to be here, and I look forward to getting a warm beverage for my 45-minute drive home.
Good. Well, there's a lot of really yummy things here, so great. So I guess I want to just start with your podcast because I've listened to it so many times. I've been a very grateful guest on your show, and I just want to put a plug out there before we dive deep into infertility land. Can you tell us kind of when it started and kind of what your aspirations around the show are?
Absolutely, yes. It started actually with myself and my then co-host, co-creator, Shauna Falana, and we started the show in, I believe it's 2018. It seems hard to imagine. And we were 2 friends who laughed a lot together and shared different podcast episodes with one another. And we decided for fun, let's just start interviewing women that we are inspired by. And that just blossomed into a weekly show that ran for about 1.5 years together, I think. And then she left the show. She's a musician and has other work. And so she was pulled in a different direction. And I wanted to revisit the theme of the show. The name itself, I Want What She Has, was actually inspired by 12-step programming. And when you look for a sponsor, you look for somebody who has what you want. And that was Shauna's sort of connection to the name. The name came through her. And I grew up in the corporate world, and I had this experience as a corporate businesswoman with a lot of, I guess, jealousy and competition in the workforce amongst women. And so I wanted to approach it from the celebratory perspective of, let's not be jealous of one another. Let's not compete with one another. Let's celebrate what other women have and say we want it too, right? Let's all help one another. And when Shauna stepped away, I got a little bit more angsty and decided that I wanted to put in this tagline that it's the antidote to the patriarchy as my way of anchoring into a mission to really tell the stories of women who are doing things that I think are helping the world become a better place, that I align with the feminine, things like creativity, community, healing, dreaming, different things like that. So that's where the show kind of has morphed into, and those are the kind of guests and stories that I like to tell.
Great. And just remind the audience, how do they listen to you each week?
Sure. Well, it is on radiokingston.org, which you can listen to online, or if you are close enough, you can listen at 107.9 FM. And it's also on all the podcast feeds, so iTunes, Spotify, all of those places. You can find it.
Great, great. Well, I encourage everyone listening to us to listen to Theresa as well, because she has an array of guests and an array of topics that are just informative and interesting. And I love the words that you just used to describe kind of your history as a person living in the corporate world and then kind of shifting to healing and the patriarchy and healing from all that, which brings us to kind of the storyline around your own wanting to bear young. Were you in that corporate setting when you decided you wanted to become pregnant?
I was. I met my now husband a bit later in life. I was just turning 40 when I met him. And probably a year after that, we decided that we did want to try to have children. And I was working my corporate job. I was also running a yoga studio, and I was directing the O Positive Festival.
You were one busy woman.
I was, a lunatic. And after probably a year of us casually trying and it not happening, we talked to my doctor, and he suggested going to see a fertility specialist. And I didn't really feel like that's what I needed. And so I started to explore this from the perspective of the mother, from my idea of what a mother is. And that's when I realized that I had largely modeled my life after my father's image as a business person. He's a lawyer. I went to law school myself. Although I didn't go to law school to be like my father. I thought I was going to change the world, but that didn't happen.
I'll beg to differ. Just to say that out loud.
Well, I thought I was going to do civil rights law, all this stuff. And it just didn't happen that way. I ended up being a prosecutor, which was the last thing I imagined I would be. So in any event, I noticed that when I looked at the person I was supposed to be, it was supposed to be somebody who would earn a lot of money and would kind of be independent and take care of themselves. And that's not to say that my mother wasn't that person, but she wasn't the breadwinner. She was a very typical stay-at-home mom. And I think at that point I realized that I'd never learned to really value that. And it wasn't something that I wanted to embody for myself. I didn't imagine embodying that. And that information came through different healers that I saw, things that would come up in my quote unquote energy field, but also just an awareness after I really started to look at why I might be having challenges and getting pregnant. And so that's when I really started to dive into the feminine and just wanting to understand it from all different perspectives. So I read a lot of books. I looked at my life. I knew that I wanted to leave my corporate job because it was very toxic in many ways. I had taken my yoga teacher training course, and as I said, I had a yoga studio at the time, just opened. And so I was pursuing this other path, but I didn't know how to walk away from that corporate paycheck. So there was just a lot that I needed to work on personally, and I felt like the challenges in getting pregnant were helping me to really become honest with myself and what the life that I really wanted to lead would look like. And we eventually got pregnant. I don't even remember if I was 42. I'd have to do the math backwards. It was 2016. So I think it was 42. I did finally get pregnant, and I was pregnant for maybe 7 or 8 weeks. I didn't see a doctor. I didn't really know that I should see a doctor when you're older, quote unquote, older. At 42.
Advanced maternal age is the technical word that we use in obstetrical land, which I have some challenges with, but it is the term we use.
Yeah. So I ended up having a very painful experience when I then started to miscarry when I was at home, which came as a pretty big shock to me because I felt like, after all this work that I had done and we'd gotten pregnant and we had just bought and moved into a new house, and I thought, like, this is it. This is what I've been trying to create. So I wasn't expecting to miscarry. And after that, I did, I think, go into a little bit of a panic and decided maybe I do need to talk to a fertility specialist. So I did. I went through the typical battery of tests that they do. And it was basically nothing is out of the ordinary with you, but you're older and your
Yeah.
eggs aren't going to work, basically, was the message that I had. And I didn't really believe it. And then oddly enough, I got pregnant a few months later. So then I was just like, yeah, this I'm
What do
supposed to
they
get
know?
I'm supposed to get pregnant. This is going to happen. But then I had another miscarriage, probably around the same amount of time, maybe 8 or 9 weeks. And at that point, I did know to contact a doctor earlier to test my hormone levels. And things seemed okay hormonally. There's a concern, right, that progesterone might not be high enough and things of that nature. But it just looked like it was not a viable pregnancy.
Did they do genetic testing on the products of conception?
This was the strange piece of information that I've never figured out, was that I didn't have what I would call like abnormal discharge when I miscarried. The first one I did, but then it was just sort of like a regular period. And I thought, what am I supposed to be looking for? So no testing was done. And I do think that the general consensus is at that age is that it is just your eggs. It was very hard to get any other kind of information. I felt a little bit stuck trying to figure out the pieces myself.
I think you're not alone in so many ways. Even women who are not in their fourth decade will often be given the diagnosis of infertility of unclear etiology. You're like, well, sorry, we can't explain why you're not getting pregnant. And in fact, it's quite a common diagnosis, and it leaves women and their partners feeling really bereft and confused because, again, in the world of medicine, science, we are led to believe that everything has an answer, everything has a cause and effect. And infertility, I often use the word magic when I talk about getting pregnant because there's aspects of pregnancy we just don't understand. And then infertility beyond that, like why? This is a woman who looks healthy. This is a woman whose testing is all normal. For you, yes, your age was one issue that we might talk about in terms of, egg quality. But there are 25-year-olds, there are 32-year-olds who come out with the same normal testing, and we can't use their aged eggs as a reason for. So, yeah, it's a very confusing, difficult diagnosis. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in retrospect, I think I would have demanded a little bit more. At the time, I just kind of went along with what the doctors were saying. And it wasn't until my final procedure where I really started to ask questions where things didn't seem right. And I felt a little bit more in control over the process. But it really, it was such a new experience that I wasn't prepared for. And it's only through, fast forward, I had 6 miscarriages or 6 pregnancies. Some might have been a chemical pregnancy, but 6 pregnancies before I had my son, that you learn a lot each time you get pregnant. And I kept thinking that there was something that I was supposed to be learning about myself in the process. Maybe that's my brain's way of making me feel okay about the challenges and the heartbreak. But I felt like that second time, I still had all of that stuff going on in my life. But I also was in the middle of getting prepared to host a big picnic at our house. And I just felt like I had overdone it to my body. And so that was the kind of the moment where I said, I really need to walk away from the corporate job. I just need to do it. And I need to start figuring out how I can take other things off my plate.
This is a common theme here on Gyno Curious, where we talk about how much women embrace in their lives, sometimes out of desire, sometimes out of a sense of obligation, often out of a sense of this is what I need to do and is expected of me. And we could talk about the patriarchy until we're blue in the face, but it's really an unfortunate result of the world in which we live. On the other hand, it may be a result of how capable we are,
Right.
and that it is nothing for so many women I know to have 5 balls in the air, a picnic, a job, a family, a spouse, a community member, aging parents, and they're doing it all. And of course, what gets lost in that shuffle, in that juggling act, is oneself. So, one, I want to honor that you were thinking about yourself. I mean, you took these years, in fact, to think about who am I, what do I need to do to be as receptive, if you will, to the forces and the magic of pregnancy. So, I want to honor that. And there is no person I know, other than someone who might be totally disconnected from her feelings, that doesn't feel grief and loss around this kind of experience. So it sounds like you began to reduce the number of balls that were in the air. How were you? I mean, was doing stuff a way in which you were coping with the loss? Was that a way of kind of, I'm gonna put that off to the side? Or how would you explain that journey of finally letting go of some things and then dealing with the emotional contours of this kind of experience?
I don't think I was busying myself to distract myself from the emotional experience of it. I think I was just doing those things because I was actually feeling very engaged in life, and I if I didn't have the corporate job, it probably would have looked very normal, right? What I was doing. But I was holding on to that because of the financial benefits of that job.
Yeah.
It was really this sort of reconciliation that I had to make with myself about fear of money and fear of lack of money. And I think that was a big part of this, whether it was the pregnancies that was taking me there, that was a lesson that I needed to learn in this lifetime. And so in that experience, I had to really do the difficult thing and walk away from that corporate job. I wondered often if I had grieved enough. Grief is a strange topic to
Yes.
me. It's hard. It's like elusive, and it's hard to really understand. Am I grieving right? Have I grieved enough? I mean, I certainly cried. At the time, I was still occasionally drinking wine. And I think there was one of the pregnancies where I remember drinking wine afterwards. And I thought, why am I doing this? I'm not letting myself feel the pain of this experience. I'm masking it with alcohol. And so I would, catch myself in that and really try to be present with it. But I think just because of my personality and who I've been my whole life, it's always like problem solve. What's the problem? I can figure this out. What's the next step? And so, or what do I need to learn? What do I need to do? Like, make me a better person. And I just kept doing the next thing that felt the right thing to do, which for us, it was then going down the IVF route.
Is that the procedure you just mentioned? A big procedure you had Are we talking about IVF at this point? You said that you had the miscarriages and had a big procedure. Was there some surgical intervention that you had?
Maybe I was misremembering the timeline. I didn't have a surgical intervention until the last round of IVF.
Okay.
I did a first round, and
how old were you at that time? About?
So it was 2017, so I was 43.
Okay.
And they were okay with me using my own eggs, and I felt okay. They said it's not, it's not a great choice to use your own eggs, but we're fine too because my numbers seemed okay. So we did, and they collected my eggs, and we had 3 embryos, and we transferred one, which I got pregnant, but it wasn't a viable pregnancy. So I miscarried, some point. Maybe it was like 7 weeks. And that was really hard for me to take because I thought that IVF would be the answer. I just thought, they're going to figure this out. It's going to work. And when it didn't, I just felt kind of knocked off my feet. And we took a lot of time off. I actually had a strange experience physically with my body where I don't know what was happening, but it was like my nervous system went into this major overdrive. I took some time off to figure it out. We actually considered adoption at that point because we had 2 other embryos, but they were quote unquote not graded very well. And I just didn't have a lot of belief that they were going to work because the good one didn't work.
Understandable. Yeah. I guess I just want to ask about the doctor involved with all this. Because again, it's something that I reflect on as a physician, being in the world of medicine. So you had decided not to work with an infertility specialist, those first couple of years, and then you started talking to someone. Did you feel like that someone was present for you, informative? How was that relationship? Because it's such a personal one, as I guess every relationship with our doctor is, but there's something about the infertility world that, just to remind the audience, it's not just the occasional phone call. It's frequent visits to the doctor's office. It's injections. It's medicines. It's a lot of highs and lows emotionally. It's a lot of work,
Yeah.
and time. And often infertility physicians have a variety of nurses and other people they have to help support you. But I have this, as a resident, I have this memory of the infertility doctors that I worked with and learned from. And they were, talk about the patriarchy. I mean, they were a bunch of older white men who used to walk around and say, I got her pregnant. I got her pregnant. I got her pregnant. And the minute I heard that expression the first time, I just recoiled. And, you could add other words like, I assisted her in her journey in getting pregnant with the following, whatever. But this concept of inseminating all these people was just grotesque. Anyway, that's my spiel. Tell me about your experience. I hope you were adored and loved and nurtured along the way, but how was it?
It was very mixed. There was a little bit of all of that. The clinic that I went to did have a very holistic component to it where there was actually a spa, attached to the fertility clinic so that you could get your acupuncture before and after. I mean, they promoted all of that kind of holistic health and well-being, offering yoga classes, etc. But the doctors that I saw were all very robotically masculine. And it was basically, you had a consultation with them. They said, your numbers are this, the sperm is this is what you should do. And then you're working with the nurses.
Yeah.
And then the doctor does the procedure, but you're working with the nurses.
And I wonder, hearing that description, I wonder whether there's some level of ways in which they're defending themselves against all the losses too. I mean, this is a science that's very challenging, the science of fertility and infertility. And so I respect that all of those of us who help heal others, we have to have some kind of psychic defense, if you will. Because if we were to take in all the stories that we hear, particularly those of loss, death, illness, suffering, it's too much to hold on to, right? So maybe that is kind of the way in which they defended themselves. Were their nurses and staff more heartfelt?
Most definitely.
Wonderful, wonderful.
And I just, not to genderize the conversation, but I know because my husband read the book at some point, it's like, what is the name of the author? I'm not going to remember, but it's like men. I just don't want to talk about it. There's this, awareness that men, and not all men certainly, but many men grow up without being allowed to be emotional and don't talk about their emotions.
Yeah.
And so if you're a doctor who isn't in touch with your emotions and knows how to be empathetic, then that's not, right? That's not going to be who you are, because the nurses were not every nurse, but many of the nurses were very much like, what can we do? Let's do this. And, very helpful and sympathetic when things weren't looking good. And so it's possible in that field because they certainly deal with people repeatedly after they've had losses, because a lot of people, it does take multiple procedures.
Yeah, yeah. So you were just telling us about the loss after the first IVF and the 2 embryos that remained. So where were you in that decision tree at that point?
Well, we had seriously considered adopting. We had gone to the foster program education for Ulster County to learn what it would be like to become foster parents. And we were filling out the paperwork. And in 2018, I did one of my epic kind of personal journeys where I drove across country by myself to go to Mother's house in Joshua Tree for a sound healing peace garden building retreat. And it felt like the thing that I needed to do for my soul. And I was doing other things medically. I was seeing a naturopath who was helping me monitor my hormones, etc., and dealing with an Epstein-Barr thing. So there were other things that were going on that I was working on healing my body. I was working on healing my soul. And then when I came back, I got pregnant. And that was probably the strongest pregnancy. When I first went to the midwife to get my checkup, she was like, "Oh my gosh, your numbers are so great. We have to get an ultrasound. We have to see it." And then when the heartbeat wasn't there, it was kind of like, And so I went back for another ultrasound, and there was a heartbeat, but it wasn't where they wanted it to be, which was just hard.
Yeah.
And
Take a moment. Yeah.
it was very below my nose.
You know, I'm going to interject while you take that breath. It's so interesting to me how that ultrasound experience impacts all of us. And I'm not talking about just pregnancy, but you know, we use ultrasound to look at the pelvis and the health of the pelvis and ovaries, and we've identified cancers and masses and you know other abnormalities of the structures, the anatomy. But there's something about that heartbeat that is so profoundly provocative. It's this visceral response. So I, you know, that's why the tears, Theresa.
Yeah.
It's just it's this concrete, not only visual but auditory experience that we have around it, and an affirmation that just feels like, oh, okay, that's what it is. So to hear that the heartbeat is too slow, which is, I imagine, what they shared with you, oh, it's wounding. It's hard. It's really hard. Yeah.
Because it was this, I mean, so much of the experience is this balance. You know, it was the balance of taking control, but also surrendering. You know, that was one of the dynamics that I was working on throughout it. And then it's this the balance of staying positive, but also being realistic about what could happen so that you're protecting yourself in a way from the potential loss.
Yeah. There's so much judgment around us mothering and mothers. Again, that's been, you know, centuries long. And what I'm hearing you say, and again, I'm so grateful to know that you took care of yourself in kind of mind, body, and spirit. What about the outside world? Where were family and friends around this journey with you? Was there judgment? Was there support? Was there a lack of understanding? How would you describe that experience? Because we can't be, you know, we're not silicone. We can't deflect all that. We can only deflect some of it, right? And then it impacts us.
Yeah. I was pretty open about my experiences. And when I was pregnant, that last time that I was just describing, the last sonogram ultrasound that I went to was December, and I was leaving to go home to visit my family. So I just got the news that it's probably not going to be a viable pregnancy. And I was going home to visit family for the holidays, and I'm feeling nauseous, like I'm feeling like I'm pregnant.
Right.
But then it's just, you know, this idea that they're telling me the doctors are saying, or that, you know, I think it was probably the midwife was saying, it's not likely going to work. And that was hard because I had to be present with my family. They knew about it. And it was this awkward thing, like, do we be happy and excited for you?
Right.
Or,
Right.
So that was difficult. But otherwise, I was very public about it. I had actually spoken a couple of times on my radio show about some of the difficulties in watching others be pregnant and trying to get a baby gate for the yoga studio and the saga that unfolded after that, while I'm trying to be pregnant. And I honestly felt very supported. I know because I have since, it wasn't until my last round or 2 rounds that I actually joined Facebook.
Of IVF.
Yes.
Okay.
That I joined Facebook groups for women over 45 trying to get pregnant. And that's when I learned so much through these other women's experiences. And even though Facebook can be tough, I felt like they were very loving communities. Sometimes you get more information than you want, but it helped me. A little late, like how I was mentioning earlier, how I didn't feel like I could advocate for myself because I just didn't have the knowledge. At that point, I was learning so much that I just had so much more knowledge to ask different questions. But I know some people, had difficulties with family and other people when they're over 45 and they're trying to conceive, and people judge them for that. But I didn't experience that.
Good. So you were mentioning a couple of different things. One, the fostering experience. What happened with that journey?
Well, once I got pregnant, we were kind of like, woohoo,
Yeah.
right? I'm pregnant. And I still, in this hopeful attitude after that miscarriage, I was like, we are going to get pregnant. Like, this is going to happen. Why do I keep getting pregnant naturally? This is going to happen. And we just kept trying. And so that was through 2018. I did so many different things.
I'm sure. Yeah.
I mean, I bought a fertility totem for a couple $100. I stopped talking about like peeling things away from my life. I left O positive. I was the board president. It was a hard thing to step away from, but I stepped away from that. I stepped away from even my sound healing practice because somebody said it's not good for the conception and for implantation. So I just kept doing all these things. And then we were going to transfer the second 2 embryos, and then COVID happened. So we didn't do that until later that year. And I think that was a chemical pregnancy. And that was, I think, probably the hardest thing, because at that point, it was 2020. I'm 46, almost 47 at that point. And I just thought, I don't know what we're going to do now.
Yeah.
We were going to go back to the adoption stuff. And actually, my husband got a letter in the mail from his home state of Minnesota about a child that they thought he was related to, that they needed to find a family to adopt. And we were overjoyed. We were like, oh my gosh, this child's just going to come to us. And then, long story short, it just didn't happen. But that was the signal to me that, we were ready to be parents. We'll be parents however we need to be. And so we ended up going the donor egg route.
Can you describe or explain that to our listeners, please?
Sure. It's ironic because I donated my eggs when I was 30 years old to someone who wanted to have a child, and for whatever reason, her eggs weren't working.
Someone you knew?
No,
Okay.
I did not know. And I have no idea if she conceived as a result of that. But because of that experience, I felt very familiar with the process. And I kind of just assumed like I knew what we were doing, told the clinic we wanted to consider donor eggs. They give you profiles of women. It was very strange to shop for eggs, to shop for a woman for her eggs.
And it's funny because, of course, semen has been cataloged and described. In other words, when women are looking for insemination, if they don't have a partner or 2 women want to become pregnant, there's this whole bank of semen out there, and they're described based on the person who gives the sperm. And it's a little bit like a dating app.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was surreal.
Yes, I bet. I bet.
And
And did you do it together, you and your husband together, or how did that work?
I think we did some of it together. I mean, we certainly looked at one, I don't remember if it was him or me kind of picking ones that we liked and making decisions about it. And it was actually pretty hard to find one that was, looked a little bit like me, was honestly what I was going for. And we were on the waiting list for a couple of women. And then I just randomly went into the system again, and a new woman had popped up, and I was like, that's her. That's the one. Something just felt like, she's going to be taken. She's perfect. And anyways, we called up, and she was available. So we did a round within like 2 months. And when we went to put in the first embryo, the nurses who were doing the why do I want to say ultrasound? Yeah, they were doing that, and they found what they thought was a little polyp, which kind of, made a series of difficult decisions. I decided to transfer an embryo anyways.
And the polyp was in your uterus?
Yes.
Okay, so this is just for the audience's knowledge. This polyp is just like a teardrop-shaped, usually, piece of tissue that emanates from the lining of the uterus. And there is some science to suggest that having polyps in the lining of the uterus might be a problem when implantation is going to occur.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at this point in my head, I am really at a loss for what is going on, because every time I miscarried, I didn't have noticeable, what I would have thought would be the discharge from a pregnancy. And so I kept thinking, well, is there something going on? Is my body fighting, attacking the embryo? Because there's all these different theories out there, natural killer cells, autoimmune things. And I just didn't know, what it was. Obviously, everyone's still saying, it's your eggs, it's your eggs. And so when we transferred that first donor egg embryo, and I think that was also a chemical pregnancy, I decided I would get a hysteroscopy to just take care of the polyp.
So this is a procedure that's done either in the office setting or in the hospital, where the polyp is removed from the lining of the uterus. Yeah.
And after that, we went back and we transferred the embryo that became my son. And I'm trying to think, well, this was where, in the conversation leading up to this transfer, I discovered that they had not put me on certain medication that most women going through IVF are on, which was very disappointing to me, that I had gone through 3 transfers and they did not put me on prednisone, which is kind of baseline.
Do we know why? Prednisone or progesterone? Prednisone.
Yeah.
We don't know why.
It was an error.
Ooh.
Yeah. And so to this day, I don't know, because I was on prednisone for that last transfer. I was on a lot of other things. I said, put everything on me. The clinic that I went to had like 4 stages of medicine to support you, assuming that at some point it would hit the thing that was preventing you from carrying and holding the baby. So I was on a lot of different medicine for that.
How was that experience?
It was actually a little empowering, because some of it, when I started taking it, I knew it wasn't right, and I stopped taking it. At that point, I knew I didn't need one of the medicines that they had given me for others. I just kind of tuned into my body. And then one medicine, which I have no idea, I don't even remember the name of it, but it's a very expensive medicine, and my insurance covered it. And I thought, well, this was magical.
Yeah.
And so, I have no idea what the magical equation was. I will say, during the transfer, the doctor, who is the head doctor of the clinic, who is a bit of a celebrity in the world and prides himself on his philosophies. He's a big, what is the diet where you eat meat? He's a big, no carbs, no sugar. It's just this whole philosophy. And during the transfer, he is giving me and my husband a lecture about how kale is killing us and how we can't eat these things. And I was laughing. I was laughing when they transferred the embryo into me.
Oh, I
And
love
thought,
that concert.
I thought
Yeah.
maybe that was the magic dust that finally made it work. I don't know.
Oh, great. So how old were you when you discovered you were pregnant this time with your son?
So that was in 2021. I was 48, 47, and then 48 when I gave birth, I think.
So your boy is now...
He is 20, almost 20 months.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
That is quite a journey. Quite a journey.
It was.
Yeah.
I mean, and I know from reading, blogs that a lot of women have even longer journeys.
Yeah.
I have friends going through the process, and I know how hard it can be on folks. And if there's anything to say is that there's a lot of people going through it. There's a lot of support that people can find out there. If you're not getting it in your friends or family or wherever, I know there are therapists now who are starting to address the mental health of infertility. So there is a lot of support. But if you don't have the funding to do, some of the mental health care around it, that I found a lot of comfort in the online communities.
Yeah. And, bringing up cost is an important one because we can't ignore the fact that there are far too many women and families who don't have access to infertility treatments because their insurance doesn't pay for it or pays for partial, which drives me utterly insane. It's like you're going to offer step 1, but not step 2. It's a tease. It's terrible. And IVF can be extremely expensive and prohibitive for many, many, many people.
I did go to a clinic that is known for its reasonable costs. And some people criticize it as being a factory and they're just kind of churning through and they keep the cost down for that reason. I don't think it is that way. But it was, to me, it was helpful that the cost wasn't what I know some other folks have paid. And I know a lot of insurance is starting to cover it more. There are a lot in the online communities. Women are like, go work at Farm Tractor Supply, go work at Starbucks, go work at these companies that have good fertility plans that you can get health care in. The problem is that many of them, if you're over 45-ish, you don't actually get coverage for infertility treatment.
Right. Yeah, there's, what you've mentioned certainly is that as one is going through this journey, find your support system, whether it be online or through your personal contacts. I want to also highlight that this is no one's fault. Infertility, again, is a science that we don't completely understand. I think that there's all kinds of situations where women are blamed for the cigarette smoking they did between 14 and 16 years of age, or maybe ongoing smoking, which is something one should stop. There are certain lifestyle issues that we know can help promote pregnancies. For example, reducing alcohol, not smoking, having children when we're a little bit younger, making sure that your anatomy is if you will, as healthy as possible. These are things you can do. Now, I'm not suggesting those are easy. I'm just suggesting those are some of the lifestyle issues that we know we've identified as possibly problematic in getting pregnant. So is there anything now about mothering that surprises you, unexpected, around having your boy in your life?
I think how much I want to be around him. I was always suspicious that I was somehow blocking myself from getting pregnant because I have all these dreams of the things that I want to do in my life. And because I was peeling back and, the layers and simplifying my life, I kind of felt like I'm not going to accomplish it all. I mean, who knows what I will accomplish, but part of me was thinking that once you have this child, this was like a subconscious thought. Once you have this child, none of that's going to matter. And so like I had this internal struggle, like, but no, I want to write the book, or no, I want to be a rock star, whatever these dreams are, but that somehow it would fade away. And they largely have right now. I mean, I still am working on writing and doing things, but I am thoroughly just enamored with my son, and it's okay if nothing else happens.
Yeah.
And that I think was surprising. I knew I would love him. I would love this child.
Right.
But not to the extent that it's impacted my life in the way that it has.
Yeah. Yeah. Parenting is such a world of unknowns and expectations and evolutions, that's for sure. And of course, I wish, you both just joy and laughter. Clearly, laughter has to be a part of this.
Well, he is probably the class clown. So I take the blame for that.
I want to ask a question, just harking back to the beginning of our conversation where you were identifying yourself more as your father than the mother figure. And now that you're a mother, does that shift the way, in any way, your relationship with your mother and father, or the way you saw yourself?
Well, the irony is that even though, like, from a professional perspective, I was always I think identifying with my father and some of my father's values, which was you have to make a lot of money, and some of the fears that I think came through generationally from my parents and their own financial experiences. But I've always been just like my mother. I've always been the mother of my friends and my boyfriends and the community and all of these things. So I've always been that person. And that was another thing that I think I was rejecting at a certain point, is I didn't want to be that for the community. I wanted to be that for my family, for my son, or for my child. And so while I have a hugely different respect for my parents, knowing how hard it is to be a parent, I don't know that anything else has drastically changed. I have a good relationship with both my parents. They're still together. They're coming to visit. They're wonderful grandparents, and I'm grateful for them.
Yeah. And, your husband's not in the room with us, but so often when we're in a relationship with someone and there's a lot of loss and grief and expectation, it can be really hard on a relationship. How did you and your husband move through this journey? Because it was protracted and a lot of loss. Yeah.
We had a lot of fun in it. We went on our little road trips because the clinic, we could have gone to a closer clinic. They have a couple of offices, but we liked the road trip. And so we went to one that was a couple hours away and stayed in hotel rooms and had little fun, getaways. And it wasn't really that hard on our relationship until when the two embryos that were our last embryos, that was very hard for me to handle. And I think he was like, it's okay, it's not supposed to happen. And I was the one who was like, no, what's next? And I don't know that he was immediately on board with using donor eggs. But we talked about it. He was like, we need to take some time. And he helped me take a little time and not just go into problem solving mode. But it really, our relationship didn't really suffer because of the infertility challenges. It might be suffering a little bit now because of the toddler challenges. But hopefully that's That will end at some
We
point.
we do tend to get through it. Yes, they are not toddlers forever,
Yeah.
at least in body. Sometimes in mind, they remain so. But again, I think the counsel I would give you as a mother of 20-somethings is just keep laughing and have a sense of humor, because life can be pretty intense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good advice.
So I just want to, as a clinician, I like science, and I just want to share with the audience, because you mentioned some of these things, and I just want to remind people that about 1 in 100 women will experience recurrent miscarriages, and that's 3 or more in a row. So what Theresa experienced is not all that uncommon. A lot of women won't know that they've had a miscarriage. They might just have what they call a late period, but in fact was a pregnancy that is not viable. And I also want to remind people that, 50% of pregnancies that are lost, particularly in that first trimester, are due to a genetic abnormality, something wrong with the embryo's chromosomes, if you will. So again, this is, no one's fault. This is just part of the magic, part of the DNA phenomenon. And so I just want to remind women who are out there who might be feeling some shame or blame or fault or embarrassment around this experience. There's it's not your fault. And our bodies, we only have so much control over them. And I would encourage you to, as Theresa has shared with us, really explore who you are and what your needs are. And everybody's got a different path along this infertility road. For some people, it's seeing an infertility doctor, day one. For others, it's not. There's no right or wrong here. Yeah. Is there anything else, Theresa, that you want to make sure that we share with those listening that just feels resonant for you?
Well, this thought just came up as you were talking, and I remember when I was going through the many pregnancies and seeing different people to support me on it, professionals in different ways, therapists, etc. The question would always come up as to why do I want to be a parent? And it was something that I didn't have an answer to. And it did cause me to reflect about, whether or not this is just something I'm doing because you grow up just with this model of what life looks like. And I was actually on a conference call. This was later in the journey, maybe after the 5th pregnancy. And I was on a healing call with somebody who does fertility work, consultations, group kind of therapy stuff. And there was a woman who had said that she was stopping, that she wasn't going to try anymore, that she decided it was enough and that was the end for her. And I could totally respect that in her. I could hear, it in her voice that she had made, resolve with it all. But hearing her say that, I knew that that wasn't my story. I knew that even though I couldn't describe why I knew I wanted to be a parent, it was just something inside. And that's something I think that it's hard to go through and it's hard to know, but yourself, your determination, your awareness will take you in the direction that you're supposed to go.
Yeah.
And just to listen and trust.
Thank you. Thank you. As I was preparing for our talk today, I read a recent Modern Love piece in the New York Times, which is often about dating and relationships. But this was written by, and I apologize if I mispronounce her name, Lori Vogt Rizzoni, and she's a midwife who wrote a piece titled, Please Stay Baby, Please. And she writes about her experiences with miscarriages. And it's just a really profound, beautiful, beautiful one. And there are so many passages that I could quote, but one I want to just speak out loud to is she says, that other people want to know how much they can calculate your pain as the person going through this experience. And that maybe the loss during in the first trimester is not enough to have pain. And for most women, they are losing babies during their first trimester, and that there is no calculus, there is no formula for how much pain you might experience. For some, it's not a great deal of grief. For others, it is. And of course, for some, it's their first miscarriage, and then they have many pregnancies after that are successful. But I want to just put it out there that, again, as Theresa is saying, we each have our own individual response to this and our each individual journey, and that nobody gets to judge it or calculate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Theresa, I can't thank you enough for being so open with us today and sharing with us your journey. And I can't wait to meet your son one day. And, may you all as a family be healthy and happy and continue along this curious life of ours.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you for having these conversations on your show.
Mm.
Very, very important. Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to thank my producers, Jen Hammoud and Matty Rosenberg, and again to the Epicurean who so kindly houses us in this beautiful space. Please join us and me at each episode of Gyno Curious. Remember to try to stay well and to listen to your instincts and intuitions. They are the best of teachers, not to be ignored.